Hear the word of the Lord from the Gospel of Matthew 25:31 through 46. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he'll put the sheep at his right hand and the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father, and inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me." Then he will say to those at his left hand, "You that are accursed, depart from me into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not give me clothing. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me." Then they also will answer, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not take care of you?" Then he will answer them, "Truly, I tell you, just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me." And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Good morning, Grace. It's good to see you all. Thank you, Marilyn, for the warm welcome. You know, Marilyn, Howard, Stan, Gong, we were all born in the same week. That was a really sort of blessed year, 1 week, especially for Grace. You guys all laugh. And thank you, Juliet, for sharing about Rise. You know, Rise and Redeemer's work is actually written about in this really now famous theological book about racial capitalism and how it promotes an alternative economy and a different way of being. And so we're really grateful for Redeemer and Rise's work. And I hope today's talk could help you to think about the joy of being mentors, of being advocates for people and kids in that context. So today I'm going to talk about meeting God in solidarity with the poor, and I'll share some stories of where I've been living in East Oakland for the last couple of decades and what's been happening over in my own experience in the last couple of years, especially with the new Trump administration. So I lived in Oakland for over 30 years, and I lived in an apartment complex, and one of the people who were my neighbors were the Lopez family, and they were a great family. I just loved this family. I just saw him yesterday, and the kids were super sweet. They were in our youth groups. I went to the first communion of the family, And over time, if you know our story, they were a family of 5 living in a 1-bedroom, really crowded, but then we won a lawsuit and they got better housing, and they actually took over Dan and my apartment, but they got a 3-bedroom. And so now they're living in a really good, healthy condition, and the father of the Lopez family was able to apply for a U visa. And that really opened up doors for him. He was then able to get work with Housing Authority, and for the first time he was able to get health benefits. So that was great. And what was really good is that his daughter then was able to get another apartment at Oak Park, and so they had a multi-generational family living in one place. And I gotta change the names of these kids. Michelle was able to have her kids live at Oak Park, and whenever they wanted to, they would just run downstairs and hang out with their grandparents because they loved their grandparents. And Oak Park had become such a safe place that kids would roam freely. Michelle didn't worry about her kids. She knew they were either with their grandparents or they were at the community garden, but she would just let them run free. And I think that's the way to live. That's the way to be. But what happened over the last couple of years is that he got denied his visa application. And so now he was undocumented, and because he was undocumented, and with the new policy changes, he lost his work permit. And because he lost his work permit, he lost his job, and then he lost his health benefits. And so now, sadly, the whole family, we're in financial difficulties, and we're working with Amy Lee at Jubilee to try to get his visa reinstated. And then what happened is, because he no longer had status, they cut off his benefits to get affordable housing at Oak Park. And so his rents became market rate. And there's no way you could afford market rates. And so the family now is in really, really dire straits, in a really hard situation. And you know, this is happening to families across the nation now. You know, we're cutting off work permits just to starve people to self-deport. And for me, it's just a really painful time, a really hard time to see our friends in this situation, and then to see our nation, right, being so unjust, so painful. And so that's how I'm feeling these days. It's like, where are you, God, in this darkness? When are you coming back, right? And more than ever, I'm asking, and praying, your kingdom come, because things are so unright. And you may feel this way too. I'm sure a lot of you feel that way. And even in your own personal lives, you may be feeling burnt out and needing revival, wanting to see God a little bit more present in your life. And that's what this story is about. Where is God in the midst of our darkness? Where's his kingdom of right relations? Where's his love even in this moment? And so in Matthew 24 and 25, the disciples actually asked the same question. When are you coming, Jesus? But they had a sort of a different reason for asking their question. They were looking around at Jerusalem for the first time, and they were like country bumpkins, and they were looking at all the buildings and going, wow, look at the buildings of Jerusalem, right? And they were so impressed by the city walls, and they were wondering, when are you going to come up and become king, right? When are you going to restore the sovereignty of Israel? When are we going to have self-control over our land? When can we live in peace without these Roman colonizers? And so in some ways, they asked the same question with a different context. They probably were unsettled by the colonization of their people, but they also wanted, when are you going to come so we could have this great place and enjoy this great, city? And so they're asking too, when are you coming, Jesus? When can we see your kingdom in its fullness? When, perhaps they may be asking, when can we have the power and control over our own lives so that we're not upset by the injustices of our government or by the injustices of other people. And so then Jesus then begins the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24 and 25. And this is a whole set of parables. And the first thing he said, well, he talks about, well, when are you coming, Jesus, in your fullness? He goes, well, there's going to be wars and rumors of wars. There's going to be persecution. There's going to be deception and lies. The gospel is going to be spread throughout the world. But you won't know exactly when Jesus is going to come back. Instead, he doesn't give them a straight answer. He says, you don't know. So don't even try to figure it out, but keep watch, right? And that's the first key lesson, is just be ready, because you never know when it's going to come. And so in order to keep watch and to be ready, he then goes into Matthew 25 and talks about 3 parables, the parable of the 10 virgins, the parable of the talents, and the parable of the sheep and goats. And I'm going to talk about each quickly. So in the parable of the virgins, if you remember the story, there's 10 virgins and they're waiting for the bridegroom. And their role, all they had to do is be ready, and when he comes, they're supposed to light the way to bring the groom and the wedding party to the wedding banquet, right? And that's their only job. Just light your lamp and then walk, right? But, I don't know, how stupid can you be to not know your one task, right? To not have oil for your lamp. I mean, I don't know, they must know you need oil for your lamp. They had their wicks, they had their lamps, they were there, but they were so preoccupied, I don't know why, they actually fell asleep on the job, right? And so for me, that's sort of weird. So you got one job in life, what's so hard about that? And then you fall asleep, right? No wonder they're called the foolish virgins. And so I think about that and I go, you just got one job. And then I realized I'm sort of like a foolish virgin in my own preoccupations. I too am not really ready for Jesus' coming, but I'm lulled to sleep in a lot of different ways. And I think there's lots of reasons why we may want to be lulled to sleep. Because for some of us, we get preoccupied because of the world, and we know we really care about our family, and so we work so hard to take care of our families. We want our kids to go to good schools and send them to Rise. We want to have them then go to good colleges and be the 20% that got into Berkeley. That's the Asian American dream. And so we become preoccupied with that task, right? Of just the affairs of the world and in that competitive environment. Or you might be so distressed by what's happening and you can't take the pains of the world, and so you just want to sort of get away. And I don't know, a lot of people talk about self-care, and so people do things to give themselves space and have mental health days. So they're not necessarily wrong aims, but what St. Augustine says is that we have these loves, but our loves are disordered, right? So it's not wrong to want to take care of your family. It's not wrong to want to take care of yourself. But if we prioritize those over being ready, then we have that disordered love. And so quickly, my way to preoccupy myself is I'm slightly obsessed with running. And let me tell you about let's see, where am I? Okay, so I'm slightly so I'm obsessed with my running, and I run because, to take care of my health. That's a good reason to take care of my health. But there's other reasons, and part of the running is that it actually gives me a sense of control. because I could actually measure and have metrics of how much I'm improving. And it's stupid, but I'm really sort of, if I'm like a little bit faster, then I've accomplished something, right? And so I'm always checking what's my time, how am I doing? And then, so I'm running a lot. I'm really obsessed because really it's a way for me to order my life when life seems out of control. So one thing that I could, improve and show I'm making gains. And then what I also do is that I start talking to ChatGPT about my running, and I give it all my numbers, and it then gives me feedback. And ChatGPT, my good best friend, is such like an active listener and so empathetic that I say, oh, I ran slow today. And it goes, oh, well, good job, you're running in zone 2, and that builds mitochondrial density. And then I go the next day, I ran faster today. I go, oh, good job, Russell. You're running faster. You're really improving. Your training's paying off. And then I go run slower the next day. It goes, oh, you ran slower? Good job, Russell. You're consolidating all your training. And so I love ChatGPT because it just responds to me so well. And so I actually spend more time talking to ChatGPT about my running than I actually run. And that's stupid, right? I'm like a foolish virgin. I'm all preoccupied, like, oh, I'm running this. And so I too am like a foolish virgin, and I'm not really ready for Jesus' coming because, I want to be ready, but I just don't have my oil ready. And in some ways, people talk about that oil being the Holy Spirit in you, having that inner preparation. So, I don't know if you could connect, but for me, I'm often preoccupied. I'm like the foolish versions. I'm lulled to sleep, and instead I'm looking at my phone, wanting dopamine hits to be diverted, wanting likes or wanting thrills from social media. But I think in a lot of ways, we're all lulled by the enticing feedback of this world, just like the disciples were sort of lulled by the grandeur of the city. So Jesus says, don't be like the foolish virgins. You got one job. Light the way to the world like they're doing at Rise. Light the way to Jesus. We have one job. But we're like looking at our phones, and it's like we're lulled to sleep. And then Jesus says, okay, that's what you're supposed to do. If you want to see me coming, be ready, be prepared, and then invest your time and your talents in bearing fruits for the master, right? And that's the parable of the talents, and I'm not going to go over that. And then he says, okay, be prepared, use your time, use your talents wisely. Instead of goofing off on your phone, Russell, invest in doing the kingdom. And the way then, he says, to invest is to care for the least of these. And so if you read the Olivet Discourse together, when are you coming, Jesus? Jesus doesn't tell the parables separately. They all make sense in context. That if you want to see Jesus coming, you get ready, you invest your time and resources, and then you invest your time and resources in caring for the poor and caring for the least of these. Got that? So it's not that hard, but I'm still foolish. But fortunately, God's grace has shown me in some ways I've spent some time with the least of these, and I want to tell you quickly some of these stories of how I've been able to see Jesus even in the midst of the darkness, even in the midst of my anger and frustration over this current moment, because Jesus has met me in the poor. And the first story is, Jesus says, I was sick, and then you came and you helped me. And one key way I think we can meet Jesus among the least of these is to realize that we ourselves are sometimes the least of these, right? We often think of the poor as the poor, outsiders, we're different, and we're self-made, we're okay, we don't need God, or we don't need our... But when we recognize that we're the least of these, when we are the sick, when we are the stranger and excluded, when we are prisoners, then God comes to meet us in that place. And so let me tell you the quick story of when I realized that. And as you see, I'm obsessed with running, and I just ran the San Francisco Marathon, but I only did the half. And I ran it the year before, and I know it's really hard. And so I'm running, and when you finish going over the Golden Gate Bridge, you're only 200 yards away from the finish, but you have to go uphill, right? And so I finished the Golden Gate Bridge, and I go, okay, I'm running as hard as I can, right? And so I'm running, and then all of a sudden, and I could see the finish line, I realized my left shoulder started drooping. And then I couldn't move it anymore. But I still want to finish, so I'm pumping as hard as I can, right? So I'm running like Quasimodo, like a little hunchback. And then, when you run like this, you can't run straight. But I started veering left. I was like, that's so stupid. I could just stop and walk. But no, I want to finish, and I'm running, and I can't stop myself from going left. And then what happens is, so I'm running left, and then I run into the crowd. And you hear this, I hear this audible gasp, like, ah! And I fall and collapse. And I could see the finish line. I'm thinking, I could crawl to the finish line because I could see it, right? So I'm laying there with my drooped arm, and then some guy comes and he picks me up. And because I still couldn't stand, he starts guiding me to the finish line. And he starts apologizing, saying, sorry. I go, what are you apologizing for? I need you, you know? And so he guides me across the finish line, and then the medics come. Like, they have to wait till I finish. I don't know why. Then they gave me a wheelchair, and then they gave me hydration drinks, and then in 5 minutes I was fine. But some of you who are older can relate to me in that feeling of exhaustion and the feeling of neediness and the feeling of being sick sometimes, that we can't stop the aging process, all right? Our bodies are deteriorating, and we need help from others. And in that case, Jesus came to me when I was the least of these and sick, and Jesus came in that form of that strange runner who I don't know. I could look him up on the race results and see if I beat him or not. But when I was exhausted and weak, he really strengthened me, right? When I was sort of paralyzed and couldn't move, he picked me up and made me whole and really helped me. And when we're the least of these, we recognize how much we need Jesus to save us, right? We need to know without God, we can't be made whole. And so, I know we're all getting older here, Grace, so when we're aging and sick, when we're tired and weak, recognize that Jesus is with us. And when people come to support us, they're being Jesus too. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. And where I live in East Oakland, a lot of people are immigrants and migrants. And you know how migrants are now being vilified and dehumanized. Jesus says, despite how our America is treating migrants, Jesus says if we invite the stranger, we're inviting him in. And so let me share you the story about my neighbor Wahid, who's Muslim from Yemen. So Wahid came at the age of 16 into our neighborhood, and he said it was terrible, because our neighborhood is called the Murder Dubs, and he was harassed daily walking to school. He said, quote, I had no help, I had no English, no language, no people. I was lost in the dark. And then I had a roommate, Dan, who befriended him and helped introduce him to other Arabic-speaking people. And eventually, after settling, he and his family owned the corner store in our neighborhood. And to serve his customers, he learned not only to speak English, but he learned how to speak Spanish and Khmer, too, to meet the needs of the Cambodians. And what Wahid did and his family did is they routinely extended credit to the people in our neighborhood who couldn't afford to pay the groceries. And there's lots of people in our neighborhood who are low income. There was an elderly woman who recycled cardboard, and when she couldn't do it, he just gave her an open check and recognized it. One time, he's at the store, and he could tell, right? He saw the guy put in milk and other foodstuffs in his pocket, and then just went up to pay for a pack of gum. And while he's seeing that, he guided the man back throughout the shelves and started adding more things into his bag, like bread and other necessities. And he said, "This is a loan. You owe me, okay?" And the man was so embarrassed, he just bowed to him and then just went away without saying anything. But a couple of weeks later, Wahid said, some guy came running back and threw $50 on the register and then ran out. And he goes, "That was the guy that I loaned the money to." And that's how Wahid is. He's always being generous and watching out for the neighbors. And he would always treat Dan and I whenever we're at the local coffee shop. We'd always find out he paid for us, right? And so, but because Wahid's from Yemen and because he's Muslim, Homeland Security and ICE call him all the time. They're always surveilling him. And they would bring him into their offices and interrogate him for a whole day. Or they would even base themselves in his store and just watch him. And so one day he said, ICE called him again, and they're talking about who he knows and who his friends are. And he says, if you want to, we'll pay you, and you could just join Homeland Security. And at that, he sort of chortled and he laughed at them. He goes, "What do you mean? I'm the real Homeland Security." And it's true, because in our neighborhood, he's the real source of safety, of protection, of connectedness, of belonging. It's not the government. It's people like Wahid. I was a stranger to that neighborhood, and Wahid brought me in and welcomed me. I was the one who didn't know my way, and Wahid gave me connections. He provided snacks and junk food and coffee. I was a stranger who was really alone and in needing support, and Wahid became our family. And in that way, I met Jesus, not by going to the big city churches or having access to the power of the nation, but I met Jesus through a Yemen grocer named Wahid. And the last way, more recently, where I've been able to see Jesus among the poor is among the prisoners as I visit them. And because of the attack on immigrants, I'm really upset. I'm really fighting for justice. I write op-eds. I try to advocate. I try to rally churches around the issue of immigration. But one of the main ways in which I want to stand with the stranger and with the poor is I stand in vigil at the ICE courthouse every other week. And so that's 6:30 cents ransom. I know Brian went before. And there people are checking in with ICE. They don't have documentation, and if you're undocumented, then you have to go to ICE periodically to check in and show you're still around. But they don't know if they're going to get detained or deported. And so it's a really scary time for them when they have to go check in. And ICE doesn't give a waiting room, and so they have to wait outside for hours until they get called in to meet the ICE agents. And so people look really strained in line, right? And you can imagine the fear they have. I've seen people have all these strong images of guys just rocking themselves, right, for self-soothing. I know people are praying. I see kids hugging their parents. One of my friends said it's like having a terminal illness where you don't know what's going to happen, right? And so that's the sort of the heightened sense of stress. And so what we do as a faith group is there's not much we can do. Like even Amy Lee, with all her legal expertise, there's not much she can do for people in the process. And so, when Jesus said, keep watch, that's what we're doing. We're in vigil with the people. And to be in vigil is just, all you can do is wait, right? That's the idea of having a vigil. It's like when you have a death vigil, when people die, you just sort of wait with the body, and people used to think the body will then move to heaven. But in your death vigil, you're with the body to keep the body company until it goes to heaven, right? That's the idea of a death vigil. And then the idea of a war vigil is that you're waiting for the enemy to come, and you don't want to fall asleep when the enemy comes and attacks you. You want to be ready. And so we're in vigil with these people, and again, there's not much we can do but wait with them. But I think in that waiting, that might be the most meaningful thing I can do, is just to be the presence of Jesus for them. And actually, I'm finding them to be the presence of Jesus for me as I struggle with the darkness of this time. So one of the things we do, and one of the ways I meet Jesus is while people are waiting in line, they're all stressed, they're all worried, we go down the line and we offer them coffee and snacks. And then I have translated prayer cards, and I like sharing the prayer cards. And as we do that, some people receive it gladly and other people say no thanks, but everyone's really grateful. And for me, it's a form of communion, because it's the same way of sharing the bread and the wine. We're sharing the coffee and the snacks. And for me, I know that Jesus said, when you're with the prisoner, when you're with the detained, when you're with the undocumented, I'm there. And I know when Jesus said, there's 2 or 3 of you gathered together, there I am in the midst. I know that when I'm dispensing coffee, in some mysterious way, that's communion. That's us meeting and connecting with Jesus. And so it's just an ordinary act, handing out cups of coffee. But it's a sacred act. And actually, the Chronicle actually just did a headline a couple of weeks ago calling it now the Sacred Corridor, because that's where they see people praying, that's where they see people sharing communion, that's where they see Jesus. Give me a couple more minutes. I see Jesus in the love of the families wanting to stay together. One time, this college kid came to accompany his mom, and he brought his girlfriend. And so, we're serving them coffee and we get to know them. And then the line moved, and the college kid then couldn't see his mom. And you could see the fear in his eyes, because that could have been the last time he ever saw his mom. And then he saw her in the other line, and he ran to her yelling plaintively, "Mama!" And he just grabbed and hugged her, right? And that mother-child bond is really how God loves us. And I saw that. I saw Jesus there in that family. And it's just, again, another poignant moment for me of seeing Jesus in the prisoner. 2 more ways of how I see Jesus at the vigil is that people go into the courthouse and you don't know if they're coming out, right? But when they do come out, we all start cheering because they're free, and they have a couple more months where they could be with their family, or they have a couple more months. And I liken it to a walk-off celebration. It's like when Bryce Eldridge hit that home run or grand slam. It really happens, but that's what I think, what it's like when a lost sheep is found, or when the prodigal father receives his kid again. It's like such relief, such joy, such, you could breathe again when they're out of the ICE courthouse. And so to me, that's another way where I see Jesus. It's Jesus welcoming us home, right? And I'm glad I could be a part of that. And my last story is of I'll call her Daniela. She was just a little girl, under 10, and then she came with her mom to check in. And sadly, Daniela then has to translate for her mom, right? Has to take all the responsibility. This poor kid is put in the position of having to advocate for her own mom. So when we see kids in line, we give them more snacks. Kids are more likely to take the snacks than the adults. And then we give them toys and chalk because they have to stay in line for hours. And you see these little kids, right? And so I'm drawing flowers on the sidewalk with Daniela and playing with her. And she goes in with her mom. And then, fortunately, she was able to come out with her mom. And we did the walk-off home run celebration. And then they walk away home. But when they're walking away and I'm saying goodbye to them, Daniela turns around, gives me the biggest smile, and says, "Thank you," and then skips off. And that smile was Jesus' smile towards me. It's in those small interactions that we really do see Jesus. And in some ways, I could be really preoccupied wanting to get dopamine hits from social media or from ChatGPT saying, "Good job, good job." But here was God turning around through Daniela and saying, "I'm shining my face on you, Russell. I'm saying, 'Well done, good and faithful servant, Russell.'" And when God shines his face on you, that's the meaning of being blessed. It's not getting all of the world and all the glory of Jerusalem. It's not having family security and going to UC Berkeley, sorry, Rise. It's God's blessing really is his favor, his seeing you and honoring you, his telling you, "Well done, good and faithful servant." So, Grace Fellowship, a lot of us, I know all of you want to see Jesus coming in his fullness. But it's not in his fullness now. The Lopez family, they got rent relief temporarily, and that's good news. But we're still longing for the day when they could just play with their grandkids and let the grandkids run free without this worry. And so I don't know what that looks like to wait when Jesus is coming in his fulling. But in the meantime, we have to be awake. We can't be lulled to sleep. We have to be ready for Jesus' coming. And you do that by looking for Jesus as you invest your time and talents. And as you look for Jesus, the best place to look is among the least of these. Mother Teresa says, in the poor and the outcasts, you'll find Jesus in disguise. I don't think so. I don't think Jesus is saying, "We're going to trick you." It's not disguise. It's pretty clear in this passage. Jesus could be found among the sick, ourselves, among the prisoner, among the naked, among the hungry. So if you want to see Jesus, go to where he's present. If you want to see his kingdom coming, go where you see love abound. And when you do see Jesus in the poor, despite the continued frustration and anger and sense of burnout over this world, in some ways, will be made well and whole. When we're with Jesus and we welcome the stranger, we'll feel that sense of connection with the God and belonging with God's family. When we're with Jesus and his people, we'll get to have his face shine on us and hear those words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Amen.